How many of you took a weekend to binge watch Orange is the New Black? We've got some fans here. Then you know Laverne Cox as her groundbreaking character, Sophie Burset. Her work as an actress and an advocate landed her on the cover of Time magazine, as well as an Emmy nomination for Outstanding Guest Actress in a Comedy Series and a Critics' Choice nomination for Best Supporting Actress. She hasn't stopped there. Laverne is also the executive producer and host of Laverne Cox Presents The T Word, which will premiere October 17th on both Logo and MTV. This is an hour-long documentary that follows 7 transgender youth across the country. Laverne is a fierce advocate who is opening hearts and minds across this nation. Equality Utah is honored to have her with us tonight in Utah. Please welcome to the stage the amazing Laverne Cox.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Oh yes. Equality Utah, how are you feeling tonight? Salt Lake City, how are you feeling tonight? Oh my goodness gracious, I'm so honored to be here. Thank you so much, Troy, for that lovely introduction. Please make some noise for Troy, your new executive director. Congratulations, Troy, on your new position. We cannot wait to see what you have in store for Equality Utah. And I must acknowledge Brandy Balkan as well. Congratulations, Brandy, on an amazing tenure here at Equality Utah, and best wishes on your new endeavors. I also must acknowledge a few of the people who've been taking care of me tonight. Michael, Preston, and Owen, please make some, do you know Michael, Preston, Owen? Thank you so much, and happy birthday, Preston. To the board of Equality Utah, elected officials, and everyone here tonight, I am truly honored to be here tonight to bear witness to all of the love that is in this room tonight. It's truly amazing. I'm so honored to be here to bear witness to all of the amazing progress you have made for the LGBT community here in Utah. And yes, and to also acknowledge that our fight is not yet won. There is so much more work to do. Now I stand before you this evening a very, very blessed African-American, transgender woman. From a working class background, raised by a single mother, living my dreams in America. Now, I feel like I need to say that again. I am a black, transgender woman from a working class background, raised by a single mother, living my dreams in America. Now, this is something that I do not take lightly, because I am well aware that this is not the case for far too many of my trans siblings across this nation. Many of my trans brothers and sisters are fighting for their lives every single day, fighting for dignity, for a sense of justice every single day. According to the National Coalition of Anti-Violence Projects, the homicide rate in the LGBT community is highest amongst trans women. In 2013, over 72% of all LGBTQ homicides were trans women. Over 67% were trans women of color. The unemployment rate in the trans community is twice the national average. For trans people of color, it is 4 times the national average right here in Utah. Trans Utahns have reported 89% of them experiencing mistreatment or harassment at work, 89%. 47% report not being hired at all or denied a job simply for being who they are. According to the Injustice at Every Turn National Transgender Survey, 78% of all students in grades K through 12 who express a transgender or gender non-conforming identity experience harassment or bullying. 78%. Right here in Utah, it is 74%. It is a state of emergency for far too many trans people across this nation, a state of emergency, and we are fighting for our lives. Earlier this year, as we celebrated the 45th anniversary of the Stonewall riots in June, a video went viral. A video of Tyra Woods and Janelle Crosby fighting for their lives on a MARTA train in Atlanta, Georgia. Fighting for their lives as onlookers watched, filming. One of the trans women was beaten and fighting, and her clothes were ripped off of her, and she was fighting for her life naked. And people sat and videotaped as if it was a spectacle, as if it was something to be entertained by. It is a state of emergency for far too many trans people across this nation. In June, as we celebrated the 45th anniversary of Stonewall, every week in June, another trans woman of color was found murdered, 4 total in the month of June. In 45 days this summer, 5 transgender women were found murdered, all trans women of color. It is a state of emergency for far too many. It's intense, because I've had this amazing year, and yet there are so many of my brothers and sisters who are out there suffering. But something I am very proud of is the work that I get to do in the media, because I believe one of the biggest obstacles facing the trans community is that people don't know who we are. Many people report not knowing someone personally who is transgender, and I've always believed that if we get to know people who are different from us as people, all of our misconceptions about people who are different from us melt away, and the media can be a powerful tool for that. I'm so grateful that I get to be a part of a show like Orange is the New Black. Are there any Orange is the New Black fans in the house? Just checking. I'm so happy to be part of a show that is changing the ways in which masses of people think about trans people. I've seen people write blogs saying that I didn't understand this whole trans thing, and then I watched Orange is the New Black, and now I get it. I've heard stories from trans people all over the country and the world who've said that they have transitioned because of this character, that they can now have affirming conversations with their friends and family about who they are because of this character. And this happened because we have amazing writing and a commitment by everyone involved in the show to tell human stories, not just for my character, but for all of the incarcerated women who are portrayed on our show. And I'm so proud of that, and I believe that it is our duty when we create media representations of trans people that they are multidimensional and truly humanizing. I was so excited to find out about the public education campaign you have here in Utah called We Are Utah. I was very excited to find out about that, and I was deeply moved, yes. I was deeply moved watching the stories of Candace and Grayson, and I was deeply moved by Grayson's mother. Are they here tonight? Yeah. Oh my God. You are truly amazing. Can we please give a round of applause to... the love that I felt watching the video moved me to tears, and I'm so grateful for that. But far too often we know that the media doesn't get it right all the time. Usually, until recently, the media gets it wrong. And one moment that I had earlier this year, it could have been one of those moments, but it ended up being a teachable moment. And it happened in January of this year when I got the opportunity to appear on Katie Couric's talk show. Does anybody see that? A few people. I got to share the couch with another trans woman by the name of Carmen Carrera, a well-known model and trans advocate. And as Katie was interviewing Carmen in the segment before I went out, she said to Carmen was there to talk about the campaign, the Victoria's Secret campaign to make her a Victoria's Secret angel and talk about her modeling career. And Katie asked her about her private parts. And this is not unusual. As a trans woman who's consumed media and searched for images of myself on television my entire life, I've seen this numerous amounts of times, reporters asking about the private parts of trans people. And a friend of mine used to say they're called private parts for a reason. They should be private. But what was so moving about that moment is that Carmen Carrera spoke back. She said, "I don't want to talk about that. That is indeed private." And that is the first time I saw on national television a trans person speaking back and saying, that there are certain questions that are off limits to ask me. And when I went out, Katie, after we talked a little bit about Orange is the New Black, asked me, "Well, Carmen has, some problems with talking about this. What do you think about it?" And I got to talk about how for the past 61 years since Christine Jorgensen stepped off the plane and became the world's most famous trans woman in the early 1950s, that the conversation about trans identity has focused on transition, surgery, and body parts. And I said that this conversation objectifies, sensationalizes our identities, and the real lived experiences of our lives don't get to be talked about. I got to talk about a young woman by the name of Elan Nettles, who on August 17th of 2001 was walking down the streets of New York City with a friend, and she was catcalled by a group of men. One of the men realized she was trans, beat her into a coma, and 5 days later, she died. Over a year later, there is yet to be an arrest for the homicide of Elan Nettles. Far too often, the homicides of trans people go unsolved. I got to talk about that on national television. And the really remarkable part of it is that after it aired, you spoke up. You tweeted. You wrote blogs. A lot of my trans siblings went on radio shows and talked about this and said, yes, there are certain questions that are not appropriate to ask trans people that we don't want to talk about publicly. And all of a sudden, there was a national conversation about what is appropriate and not appropriate to ask trans people. And it happened because all of you spoke back. This is the Allies dinner, so I think another remarkable thing about it is that 4 days later, on her follow-up Friday, Katie Couric came onto the air and said, "This was a teachable moment for me. I did not realize that these questions were inappropriate." And how often do journalists do that? Do they go on television and say, I was mistaken, I didn't know, but I'm going to try to do better next time. And what was so remarkable to me about what happened after that is that I got to have amazing conversations with Katie Couric about these issues. And we plan to have me come back onto her show where I would lead the conversation about how trans identity should be talked about, because at the end of the day, I think being a good ally is about letting the folks that you're in allyship with lead the conversation about who they are, what their stories are, and how they should be told. And when I went back on the Katie Couric show, I got to talk about a young woman who we know as Jane Doe, a 16-year-old girl who at the time was in solitary confinement in an adult prison in Connecticut without charges having been filed. We got to talk about the intense and serious conditions of so many trans people who are incarcerated, the misgendering that so often happens when trans people, often trans women, are incarcerated with men. I got to talk about CeCe McDonald, a young woman who I'm executive producing a documentary on called Free CeCe. We got to talk about her story. CeCe McDonald, on June 5th, 2011, was walking down the street with a group of her friends, just going to the grocery store in Minneapolis, Minnesota, when she heard racist slurs. She heard anti-gay and anti-trans slurs, and a fight ensued. Defending herself, one of her attackers was murdered, and she spent 19 months of a 41-month prison sentence in a men's prison in St. Cloud, Minnesota, for defending herself, for fighting for her life. We got to talk about that. We got to talk about the culture of violence against trans women on national television because of allyship, because Katie really had a teachable moment. And I think that so much of my work every single day is about critically interrogating where I am today. What am I missing? Who am I leaving out of the discussion? And I talk about trans people a lot because I feel like enough people aren't talking about us. And there's so many amazing stories and so many sad and tragic stories that I think we all need to know about. We all need to know about. So, and the piece of violence, I have to tell you, is so important to me. And I think at the end of the day, we all have to find what part of the movement speaks to us. I speak about trans representation in the media and violence against trans women because those are the issues that deeply resonate with me because of my life experience. Find those issues that deeply resonate with you and do the work. I was born in Mobile, Alabama. Yeah. As I said, I was born to a single mother, and I was born exactly 7 minutes before my identical twin brother, so I'm older. And I never let him forget it. But that also means that he's younger, and he never lets me forget that. And violence was such a huge part of my life growing up in Alabama. I was bullied severely from the very first times I started having interactions with other kids. From preschool up until high school, I was called names. I was chased home from school practically every day. I was held down, kicked, punched, and beaten, hit with drumsticks at one point. And you know, it's funny, it took me a long time to actually get in touch with the pain that I was feeling around all that. For years I joked I was a very fast runner as a child. But there was a lot of pain attached to that and a lot of trauma, and it's taken me a lot of years to heal from that. When I was 11 years old, because of all of the taunting I experienced, and I just did not want to be myself anymore, and I did not know how to be anybody else. I went to the medicine cabinet in our apartment, and I took a bottle of pills and I swallowed them, and I went to sleep hoping not to wake up. I did wake up the next day, and thank God I did. But I also think it's important to note that 41% of all trans people have attempted suicide compared to 1% of the rest of the population. 41%. And living in a world for me that told me that I was wrong everywhere, in the media, at church, at school, my teachers, my mother, everyone was telling me that the things that were natural to me, that were normal to me, that were a problem, that I somehow could not live up to the expectations of someone assigned an M for male at birth, because everyone said I acted like a girl, whatever that means, because we know that girls act all sorts of ways, right? Cut to me finally living in New York City, where I call home now, and beginning my transition into womanhood, and walking down the street and experiencing a lot of that same bullying, the same taunting I experienced as a child. People yelling, "That's a man." And by the way, I have come to believe after all these years that calling a trans woman a man is an act of violence. There were so many times when I heard that there was violence attached. There was a threatening tone to it. It was just a year ago. I was walking in New York City, and I passed this man, and the guy said, "You look like a dude who can really fight." And I remember looking around, and I'm like, "Is he talking to me?" And there was no Bluetooth, and he was, and there was this threatening tone. There was this threatening tone. He wanted to fight me just because I was walking down the street, just because I had the audacity to leave my apartment as myself. Trans lives are often in danger simply for walking down the street as ourselves. There was a moment 6 years ago, in 2008, when I was again walking down the street in New York City, when I passed a group of young men, and I heard anti-gay slurs, I heard anti-trans slurs, and one of them kicked me. And I remember being in shock around it, and I called the police, and I feel very lucky that I had a good experience with the police, because far too many trans people do not report feeling comfortable calling the police. They don't feel safe. And far too often, trans women are profiled by the police and criminalized simply for walking in a certain neighborhood as themselves. It is a state of emergency, but I feel so hopeful tonight, hearing so many of your stories and seeing the ways in which you are advocating for yourselves and for each other. And I believe that that is a huge part of the equation. I mentioned Stonewall earlier, and I think it's important to have some history lessons. I was very blessed to be one of the grand marshals for the LGBT Pride Parade in New York City earlier this year. And the reason I accepted is because I immediately thought about the legacy and the history of Stonewall, and I was deeply surprised to find out that a lot of people did not know that fateful night in 1969 in June, that when the Stonewall Inn was raided, that the patrons were lined up, and if you were not wearing at least 3 articles of clothing associated with the gender you were assigned at birth, you would be arrested. So the Stonewall Rebellion, yes, was about the freedom to love who we want to love, but it was also about gender freedom, gender self-determination. It was also about fighting back against police brutality. I think it's so important for us to remember this history, remember that trans people were a part of this history. Trans people like Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson, trans people like Miss Major and Jane County. There was a moment, there's this amazing video that my friend Raina Gossett, who works at the Sylvia Rivera Law Project in New York City, uploaded onto YouTube that I recommend that all of you go and watch. If you just search Sylvia Rivera speech, it'll come up. And it is a speech that Sylvia Rivera gave in 1973 at the Gay Pride rally that year. Now, Sylvia Rivera was at Stonewall the night that the riots broke out. Some people think that Sylvia threw the first glass, threw the first bottle at the police. She was one of the founders of our modern LGBT movement. But 4 years later, the organizers of the gay rally that year did not want to have her speak. She was not the right kind of person to represent them. But she fought her way to the stage. She fought her way to the stage, and she said, "Y'all better quiet down." Yes, it's major. They were booing her, but eventually they quieted down, and she told them that she has been beaten for gay liberation, that she has been raped and gone to jail for gay liberation, but you treat her this way. We would not be here today if it were not for all of the sacrifices of people like Sylvia Rivera, Marsha P. Johnson, trans and gender nonconforming women. Sylvia also warned us that day, over 40 years ago, about becoming a movement that was only for white, middle-class people. And I think when I think about that, I think that it's so important that as we fight for justice for the LGBT community, we have to remember that there are people who are LGBT who are also people of color, who are also poor and working, who are also undocumented, and their struggles need to be acknowledged. They need to be fought for as well. Sylvia was so devastated by the diss, the colossal diss that happened that day in 1973 that she left the movement for 20 years. And 40 years ago, trans people were left behind in the fight for LGBT. We weren't calling it LGBT, I know back then. It was all gay liberation. But the interesting thing to me at the time of Stonewall is that everyone was gay and drag queens and trans people. Everyone was actually hanging out together because at the end of the day, they were all in the same boat. And at the end of the day, we're all in the same boat. But far too often in our community, the T has been left behind in the LGBT community. In New York State, my adopted home, where I call home and I love, 12 years ago in 2002, the Sexual Orientation Non-Discrimination Act, SONDA, was passed. And the Empire State Pride Agenda let that bill go through without trans inclusion. And I was so deeply moved when I found out that here in Utah, you are not going out like that. I was so moved and happy to find out that you will not leave the T in the LGBT community behind, but there's so much work to be done because I've talked to trans people all over the country who are frustrated, who don't always feel safe and welcome in LGBT spaces, and I think so often in my life I have not felt safe, and it's incumbent upon all of us to ask ourselves, how do we create safe spaces for everyone to feel like they can be themselves? And I feel a lot of that's happening today and tonight in this room with a lot of the work that you're doing here in Utah, but I feel like we have to do it better. And when there are safe spaces, we need to let the community know that they're safe spaces, because there's a lot of people who are oppressed have a lot of trauma, a lot of collective trauma around that oppression, and oppression hurts. It's deeply painful, and far too often we take it out on each other. I love this expression. It's hurt people hurt people. And so I'm so encouraged tonight hearing your stories and hearing about the work that you're doing, because it sounds like you are doing the work to create safe spaces so that we can all heal together and work together and love together. I want to leave you with the words of my sister, Lord Ashley Hunter, who is with the Trans Women of Color Collective of New York City. She said in a speech recently that when I leave my apartment, I'm not sure that I will return, but I hold my head up anyway because I have no choice. I want to leave you today with a lot of love and to remind you that your voices matter, that you can lift your voices and be heard. And a really great way to do that is to vote. A really amazing way. We have a midterm election coming up, and the stakes, as we all know, are really, really high. I've always voted as I felt, as a black person, that my ancestors literally died for me to have the right to vote. So it's something I never take for granted. So I want to leave you with a lot of love. I want to leave you with the invocation to lift your voices, to lift yourselves and each other up. And let's all do it together. Thank you so much, Equality Utah. I love you. I love you so much. Thank you.